Hello board gamers of the world, welcome to one more video at the Curious Box. Today we have a great interview with a great board game designer. He is one of the faces behind such favorites as Flamme Rouge, 13 Minutes or the upcoming Copenhagen. I'm talking about Asger Granerud, Danish guy, really cool guy. He is now at the Curious Box. Hi Asger, welcome to the Curious Box. It's a pleasure having you here. Let's start with Flamme Rouge. How did this idea for this game happen?
The first idea for Flamme Rouge came from a mechanical thought, but before I made the first prototype, and actually maybe half an hour after I had that mechanical thought, while thinking about the idea, I already knew that I wanted to make it a cycling game. So it wasn't a long process where a mechanic late in the game found a theme. It meshed almost in the first idea I had.
Are you a cycling lover? I mean, did it begin with that, the idea?
I like watching cycling, but actually I've started watching more cycling after I made Flamme Rouge. Having said that, during my childhood, my dad, when he was still young, he did cycle as an amateur cyclist, and during my entire years of growing up, every summer on the summer holidays, he was always watching Tour de France. So sometimes I watched it as a child, and sometimes it was just the sound from the TV in the background. So a little bit, we call it the sound of summer, right?
How long does it take for you to create a game?
There are some games where they end up taking 6 years in the making. We have one coming later this year we're very much looking forward to. And then there are some games that almost immediately click, they make it. Something about it makes sense. And with Flamme Rouge, again, in that first half an hour of getting the idea and thinking about it, just in that time frame, I remember thinking, this should work. I actually remember thinking, I cannot see this not working. And already the first prototype I made, I just tried out a lot of different things. I made some different rules for slipstreaming, changed the mid-game, made a lot of different numbers and cards, found out what should work. Didn't care much about if it would actually work as a game, but just did it to try out different stuff. And already after that first playtest, the second prototype I made, if there wasn't any mountains in it, it was just a core game, but it was 99% what's in the box. So it wasn't. I don't. With this game, there wasn't really any big hurdle. Some games takes years and years and years for us. Some games are more like inspirational, and then they're just there.
When do you know? Is there a moment when you know that a game is ready?
That depends what you mean when you say when the game is ready. But again, almost the second prototype. So within a few weeks was what it is. And then since then, there was a lot of thought about thinking about the product, about the player count and how we should make the tiles, etc. But the core mechanical rules of it, with the mountains, etc., I think was definitely less than a month. That it was more or less like it is, and also the length of the track, which is quite important for the total experience, was also more or less as it is now. So again, very fast. And then I'm not saying this is normal, because we have other things where, first of all, we have things we've been working on for years and that are not seemingly going anywhere, not becoming anything, and then we have games that we've worked on for 5-6 years, and one of those are coming this summer. So there's not one formula for how it works, but with Flamme Rouge it was very fast.
How did this passion for board games started for you?
I think if we have to go really back when it actually started, then I think it was, I used to play a lot of Warhammer Fantasy, with the small toy soldiers and building and painting armies. And I did that so much that I also created a lot of house rules for it. So we made our own variants, etc. I got involved in the tournament community, not just in Denmark, but across Europe. And for that, also started making rules for some of these tournaments, new scenarios, new rules for how to balance army books, etc. So I think that for 10 years or so, my main hobby was playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And most of that time, I did a lot of design work, not for making a game for something else, but for tweaking other games. Then, I think 6 or 7 years ago, I was losing a bit of my interest in Warhammer Fantasy, and I still had some creative energy, and I always liked playing board games. So the guys I used to play Warhammer with now started playing board games with. And slowly I started thinking about these games and what I liked and didn't like, because that's what I've been doing for years and years with the Warhammer thing. And eventually that meant that I tried to make my own games. And the first 3 games, Flamme Rouge is the 3rd game I would say that I made of my own. And all 3 games started with sports themes. So there's an American football one and a normal football, or just soccer as they call it, and then the Flamme Rouge one. And I think for me it worked well because it meant that I had some rules that I could lean against. If you're playing a football match, then you know what the goal is, right? I don't have to make that up. And if you're riding on a bike, then you also understand what the goal is. You have to get first across the finish line. So leaning against some real life stuff, I think helped me get started with it.
When exactly did you know that you wanted to create board games for a living?
But but I just decided that I wanted to try to. So it was just a decision that I wanted to do it. If the question is when I knew I had something that worked, then it was with Flamme Rouge on that 2nd prototype. I played it with my wife, and she never really likes to play my prototypes, but she indulged me, and she actually asked to play it again immediately after, and again. So we played it 3 times straight, and that has never happened before with any of my prototypes. Even the ones we make now, she's saying, but it's so ugly, right? We have those homemade hand-drawn prototypes, and she can't abstract from it. She wants the pretty graphics, and before they are there, then she's not really into it. But when I knew that she liked it and wanted to play it more, and of course I knew I liked it myself, there was something into it. That's when I knew that there was a game that I thought would be published.
What was your first game design?
The first one that was published and on shelf was 13 Days, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The first one that I designed that got published was Flamme Rouge. So it was just, they swapped around. The first contract I got was Flamme Rouge, but the first one released was 13 Days.
Yeah, you've been partners with Daniel for a long time, a very successful partnership, I would say. How did this partnership started?
No, on my very first Essen, I brought Flamme Rouge and found a publisher in the half year after that. I found one of those I showed it to, ended up being the publisher, Lauter Pelit. But I went to that very first Essen with one of my climbing friends, Daniel, who I now co-design all my games with. And that experience bonded us stronger. We went there by car, so we had a lot of time back and forth in the car. We started talking and brainstorm making 13 days on that trip back home. And then a few months after, we started doing that. And since then, it's just worked for us that we actually... We understand each other and we want more or less the same thing from it, and we work in similar ways but still think differently. It's a good match, and since then we've designed every single game together.
Do you think it's easier? I mean, at least for you, is it easier to partner with someone else, to create a board game with someone else?
For sure, of course, that's not to say that would work for everyone else. It's an individual process. But for me, It means a lot of things. It means I'm committed to someone else. So it means that I can't just go and watch Netflix because I have someone else relying on me for this as well, right? That if I'm asking him to do something, then I have to do something myself. It means that we can actually playtest these games without getting playtesters. Of course, that made it even easier when we made 13 Days, because that's a 2-player game only. So we could get the full playtest experience. Of course, we were more knowledgeable than the new players of the game, but we could still test the game. And secondly, nowadays, it just means that when we brainstorm back and forth, the process of getting bad ideas out of the way is much, much faster. When I sit with an idea inside my head, I can think, oh, it's a good idea. I start thinking about other ways of doing it and getting it back and forth, and then I get locked in. But if you have something to talk to ping pong with, then you can shorten that cycle and get past the bad ideas and to the good ideas much faster, and without sometimes having to even test it. Not entirely without having to test it, but some of the ideas you can just get rid of from talking.
Do you ever get attached to an idea to the point that it's really, really hard for you to leave it behind?
All the time. All the time. For sure. Like I'm a human. I get attached to ideas, and sometimes I speak faster than I think. So it's also I can start supporting something without having actually thought it fully through. But and specifically with 13 Days, Daniel and I almost flipped a coin on some of the final end game scoring, because he had an idea and I had an idea, and we had the ideas together, but I thought one idea was probably a little bit better, and he thought it was another idea. Not big, huge stuff, but thankfully he won that coin flip, that virtual coin flip, because in hindsight, there's no doubt about it that I think his solution was the better solution. So it happens all the time. I think one of my strengths is that I'm not scared to admit that I have been wrong in the past. And I think that another good thing about me and Daniel working together is that even when I go off on a tangent or say something or I really support something, then he just sits there quietly nodding, and then he says, yes, but, and then he draws me back into it, and then not sometimes at least, we just find out that he was probably right. So it happens, and again, if you have the right co-designer or the right playtesters, etc., and the willingness to not be attached to the idea, then it's not too hard to get out of. And finally, I think just what I've learned even more so in the last year when I've gone full time is a lot of humility to the task of understanding that even if when I think we're done, or if something is right or correct, that I often find out that it could have been even better. We can keep making it better. So we've just learned to make less assumptions and make more tests. And it doesn't mean that you need to test everything 10 times, but if you have some idea, just instead of saying it's a bad idea or instead of saying it's a good idea, get it to the table, try it. And often you can try it once and find out, no, that wasn't a good idea, right? And then you can move on. Or you can talk about why was it a bad idea, etc., and then find out, could you make something to tweak it and make it a good idea? But you learn something about it instead of thinking that design is something that happens only inside your head. It's the collaboration between inside your head and outside on the test.
Was the reaction to the game positive right away?
I don't think so. Not with that game. It isn't a game for everyone, right? Not everyone likes there's some randomness, and it's not easy to see how you should navigate it. But that game was quite different than to a lot of other of my designs. That I think more than 9 out of 10 people really liked it. not necessarily loved it, not all of them wanting to go out straight and buy it and add it to their collection, but they thought the experience was pleasant enough. And then some of them really loved it. But I can think of other games we have made, and especially prototypes we have made, where people like just didn't like it. One easy thing to mention is like dexterity games. There are a lot of people that just don't like to do dexterity. Those games can make it really, really hard on people. We had a dexterity cooperative game, which like triggered people even more, because if they felt they were bad at dexterity games, then often they would avoid them. But if they were in a co-op, now they felt that they were bad at it, and it hurt other people on their team for being bad at it. So like that was in some ways a really terrible experience for them.
Yeah, but you keep designing no matter what.
All the time. I as a very, very rough rule of thumb, I say we probably, Daniel and I, we probably design 30 games every time we get 10 published, right? And then out of those 10, maybe one of them becomes a hit of some sort. And of course, I do think we're getting better than those numbers. I think we're hitting a little more than 1 in 3, and I also think we're getting a little bit better rate on the hits. But I think that's how it was in the past. So that means that every time you see one of our games on shelves, even if you notice all of them, then there are 2 games that just are in a drawer and never worked, or there was some idea we couldn't find a solution for a problem in it. Often a game can have a good solid core idea, but there can then be a problem with the idea or the mechanic or the way you find around it that maybe causes too much AP analysis paralysis, and people can't get into flow state, and becomes too long for what the experience actually warrants. And if you cannot find a way of solving that problem, then the good idea has nowhere to go, unless you then make an entirely new game based on that good idea.
Did you realize from the very beginning that Flamme Rouge would be this success?
I think it's a weird, it's a difficult thing to say. But already at the first Essen when it released, I normally at Essen I have a lot of meetings, but that Essen I had a little bit less, and every time I had a spare minute, I ran to the Lauter Pellet booth and I helped demo the game. And I could see the reactions it was getting, and I could also see how they were selling it. It wasn't their biggest seller of new releases at that con, but I could see that people really like it. They understood it fast, and even people just walking by, seeing a pitch and understanding how the rules were being played, were getting into it. More than once, I heard people in that demo, doing a demo, and I heard people then they played one turn of the game, and then they said, I really like this, right? After one turn of a race game where you really need to see all of it, because there is some core element of the mechanic that I think is just enticing psychologically with the reveal and what everyone else is doing that triggers something that works. So I think that's probably when I, but I wouldn't say I knew it, because that's when I hoped it, but even earlier than that I hoped it. And I'm still hoping that it will keep going upwards, but you never know. In half a year or 2 years, maybe it will start going on a dip, and then be gone and disappear. Of course, I don't hope it will happen, but I don't know. So it's always like a step at a time. I'm very happy with where it is. I'm very proud of it. Also having won prizes and been nominated along a lot of places. It beat Azul in the Italy Game of the Year. How awesome is that? That's fantastic.
Did you think about any expansions even before you created the game, or while you were creating the game?
The specific expansion with all the specific content involved in that was not there before we started working on it, because that's also finding out what the product should be. But for sure that long before I even had a publisher, there were a lot of ideas for expansions. As anyone who has followed it on Board Game Geek or the community of Board Game Geek would know, then there's also like a free app you can use to play a Grand Tour. And that app is based off some Grand Tour rules that I actually uploaded before the game was even released. So you could go and get like a free expansion with extra rules that I have been playing with my group, where you can play a Grand Tour and play several stages along in a row, where the exhaustion is added from one stage to another, so you don't start every game with fresh legs. But I think what was probably also showed that it could be a success quite early in the game was that I could not play this game with other gamers without them suggesting new things that they thought should be added, right? Because the core game is so simple and the system is there that it inspires naturally, at least in a lot of the testers I had, making ideas of, oh, we could do this a little differently, etc., etc. So we are working on the third expansion to come for this Essen, and I have ideas for a fourth and a fifth and a big deluxe version, not just including it, but making something really spectacular as well. But all these are just ideas in my head. They are not promises from the publisher, etc. at all. We take 1 year at a time, and of course we have to see if it keeps selling. If it doesn't, and if it stops selling, then they will not have an interest in making new content for it.
All right, so what's next for you guys?
Yeah. We have we have Copenhagen being released from Queen Games this spring, and we have very, very high hopes for it. It's a simple Tetris style game, and it flows really fast, and it's getting really good reactions where people want to play it again and again and again, right? And also it plays rather fast, so that makes it easier. It can play down to 20 minutes when you really know it, and otherwise goes to 30. I think that's the first one releasing this year. Then we have a big game coming from a big publisher at Essen, which I'm very excited to tell you about. That's the one that's been going for 5-6 years. But I cannot tell you who it is or what the name is, etc. Except I can say that we are in the very, very final steps of finishing it. And for me, it has some games when you have worked on them for a long, long time, you get tired of them. You want them to go away, and you want the publisher to develop it and take responsibility for it and finish it, and you just want it to be over and you want to see the final product. This game, I'm testing. I have 8 playtest sessions in a week. This week we're talking now, and I'm testing it all the time. And I want to play it again. And even when I'm just sitting and looking at other playing, I'm saying, oh, I'd like to join it and just do it a little different, show them how, right? Because so I haven't had as strong that feeling since Flamme Rouge. So hopefully that's a good sign. We have, the theme has been locked in place. I don't think it will change, and the theme is each player, it's 2 to 5 players. It's a family game that goes 45 minutes. I have seen it played in less than half an hour, down to 25, and I've also seen it go over an hour. So 45 to 60 minutes is a safe bet. It's from 10 years and up. 8 years old can play it and understand it if they're gamers and if they can sit still and concentrate for an hour, right? And the theme is that each player is a family of treasure hunters, and they have 2 ships and they are a crew. And they take those ships, they sail out in the ocean, they look for wrecks beneath the sea, and they dive down into those wrecks to find treasures. everyone else is doing it at the same time. So there's a little bit of exploring the areas and moving around and getting first to the best dive spot, so you have the best dive, because you don't want to be down too long, or you risk getting what's it called, depth sickness, or the sickness you get from being too low or too deep, or surfacing too fast. But of course there could also be sharks arriving, so there's some dangers you need to navigate, etc. You hire some new crew to help you. Maybe you hire a shark expert or a silver expert that will help you find even more silver down there. Yeah, and it's very exciting. We've got a party game coming, a cooperative party game with a little bit of dexterity, even though I said but not much, but a little bit of dexterity coming, I think, also at Essen. I think that might be it for this year. And then a few games coming next year. We have some projects that we are working on ourselves and finding some partners for that we'll be more involved with, that I'm very, very excited to talk about. But I just want maybe half a year more to start talking about it.
Don't you guys feel tempted at some point to remake the same formula again and again, just because you know it works?
No. And just to say, there are some designers that are not looking to create different things. You can see some designers that create an experience and then they make another game based on the same core concept, and they tweak it a bit, and then they make a third game on the same core concept and tweak it, etc. So, but we do like to make different games. We've made Panic Mansion with the shaking of the box. We've made a real-time cooperative pirate game with a tall 3D ship called The Tale of Pirates. And we've made like really crunchy card-driven games like 13 Days and Iron Curtain. And of course, really light family games and even other children's games down to 4 years old. And when you make such a range, there will never be something that should always be there. For me, when we design, it's about finding out what is the identity of the game, and then making sure that we take the right decisions for that game. It's not my idea of the game. That's where it starts, or with Daniel's idea of the game. But as soon as we start building it, we need to respect what the game is, and then find out what works for that game. And that's not always the same. Of course, there are some things that we found out, like the reveal in Flamme Rouge with the cards, or just the reveal at the end of a game of Ticket to Ride. There are some things that are universally exciting, where you go, ooh, what's gonna happen, right? But it doesn't mean it should be in every game.
And just one last question: what advice would you give to a first-time game designer?
I think my general advice would be two things. Number one would be to stop thinking about it and start making it, right? Early when Daniel and I sat down and actually worked on 13 Days the first time, we had already decided ahead of meeting that first day or afternoon that by the end of the day we had to play the game. Okay, so we couldn't sit down and plan and plan and plan and plan. We had to find out a way of actually making enough of a stand-in that we could play the game. So you can think, but if you start thinking too much, you will overthink, or you are at risk of overthinking. And it's much better to find out if your thoughts are right. And the only way you can find out that is by testing them. So test early. Do not make a pretty prototype, because you will get involved in it. So make it almost as ugly as you can. Don't try to make it ugly, but for sure do not spend time on it, and test it the same day or immediately, as fast as you can. I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's also what I still see a lot of my playtest friends in Copenhagen, that they end up doing, they end up thinking about it too much and testing it not enough. Testing it not early enough, because it's not because if you test early enough, then often you won't need to test a lot, because you'll find out that there's something that's just wrong, and you'll also find out what actually, if you ask this question early in playtest, what actually people enjoyed about it. And that would be the second thing, especially if you're starting out as a new designer. You try to find out what the core experience of your game is. That if you add too much on top of it, if you have a rather simple game, but you also add characters you can buy and cities you can influence and buildings you can upgrade, that can all be needed in the final product you're going to make. But the first thing you have to find out is the core activity that players are doing every turn and repeating. Is that actually interesting and enticing? And that's what you really need to get right to have a good game. And then you can often, I was almost going to say always, add extra stuff. That's not without complications, and of course not, but if you found that core of a game, then adding extra stuff later is, for me, the better way. And I think it's a good way, especially for new designers, to learn it, and it's still what Daniel and I do more or less to this day.
And this was Asger Granerud, the great designer behind such already classics as Flamme Rouge, 13 Minutes, or one of my favorite games, Iron Curtain. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have some doubts, if you have some comments, just share it here in the comment box. I hope you liked the interview, as I said, and if you liked it, why not subscribing the channel? There will be more interviews coming. Already there is another Danish designer coming next to the Curious Box, and some other great videos. So subscribe the Curious Box and help the cause to grow. It's easy, just hit the subscribe button. Thanks a lot for being there. Thanks a lot for sharing your time with the Curious Box, and I hope and I will see you for sure at a table close to you.